있다는 거를 알게 되셨어요.
다리도 안 올라갔거든요, 솔직히. 근데 64세부터 태권도를 해서 7년째 하고 있습니다.
인상도 너무 밝아지셨고 빨리 가고 싶다고 하시고 도복을 보면서 흐뭇해 하시더라고요. 그때부터 어머니의 삶이 다시 시작이 된 것 같고 지팡이를 안 짚기 시작하셨어요. 그게 진짜 놀라운 변화인 것 같습니다.
어르신들이 운동을 통해서 노년을 건강한 생활을 할 수 있게끔 도와주는 게 바로 저는 태권도라고 생각이 듭니다.
Not only did Mother experience this change, but her fellow teammates also felt reborn due to the dramatic change in their lives.
너무 좋아요. 온 세상을 다 얻은 것 같죠. 제가 태권도 전도사가 된 것 같아요.
열정이 높으신 분이죠. 그 가족 전체가 태권도 가족입니다. 아주 화목하고 건강이 넘치는 대한민국의 대표적인 태권도 가족이 아닌가 싶습니다.
We're a family that loves practicing taekwondo, so we've embarked on a new challenge.
사실 저희 가족들이 아픔이 정말 많습니다. 제가 아침에 일어났는데 반신이 마비가 왔었고 저희 아이는 태어나자마자 인공 심박기를 달았었고 정상으로도 살기 힘들다는 진단을 받았었지만 이 아이를 보면서 기적이라는 것을 알게 됐거든요. 그래서 태권도는 행복 그 자체입니다.
태권도를 해서 강해지니까 더 자신감이 올라가고 행복해요.
I believe taekwondo is a blessing from heaven. It has made us hopeful for the future. Every day, we're excited to see what's in store for us tomorrow. Practice it with your family. Taekwondo brings happiness.
The moment we wear it, our spirits lift. It helps us grow strong in body and in mind. As we wear it, we learn patience and respect. The belt system motivates students to strive harder and continue growing. This uniform shapes movement into grace and turns performance into something thrilling. Now, embraced around the world, Taekwondo shares our culture, philosophy, and values with pride and spirit. Though it may seem simple, this uniform holds your passion and your journey. It belongs to Taekwondo. Wear the extraordinary. Be with Taekwondo.
On this Tuesday, the National Assembly passed a controversial media reform bill that would revamp the governance of public broadcasters, with the ruling Democratic Party leading its passage after a day-long filibuster by the main opposition People Power Party. A task force designed to craft a mid to long-term economic growth strategy under the Lee Jae-myung administration held its first meeting on Tuesday, where the finance minister stressed that the core of its growth strategy must be business-friendly. Consumer prices in South Korea went up more than 2% for the second straight month in July, driven by higher costs of processed food and seafood. Tensions are escalating at the National Assembly as a filibuster by the opposition comes to a close, now only for another to begin. At the heart of the standoff is a media reform bill pushed by the ruling party. Our Moon Hae-yeon has our top story.
A 24-hour-long filibuster launched by the opposition People Power Party came to an end Tuesday afternoon after the ruling Democratic Party passed a motion to close debate. The PPP initiated the filibuster in an attempt to stall the passage of a contentious media reform bill, which the ruling party introduced at Monday's plenary session. Under National Assembly rules, a filibuster can be forcibly ended only after 24 hours have passed and at least 3/5 of sitting lawmakers, 180 members, vote in favor of doing so. The threshold was met and the DP immediately followed up by passing the media reform bill, where 178 lawmakers voted in favor and 2 against of the 180 votes cast. The PPP did not participate in the vote. The media reform bill is one of 3 controversial legislative proposals aimed at overhauling governance structures at South Korea's public broadcasters. The DP claims the reform would reduce political influence over broadcaster leadership, while the PPP warns it could undermine press freedom.
To boost press freedom and independence, the bill makes CEO appointments more transparent and democratic. The 3 broadcasting control bills can be seen as a prelude to the dictatorship of the Lee Jae-myung administration. Before long, they will take control of the general programming cable channels in the same way, even though those are not included for now.
The remaining 4 bills on the agenda, including 2 other media reform bills, the so-called Yellow Envelope Bill aimed at protecting unionized workers, and a revision of the Commercial Act, will carry over into the August session, with a plenary vote likely scheduled for later in the month. The PPP has vowed to continue its resistance by launching filibusters against each of the remaining bills, with a second filibuster already underway as of Tuesday evening after the next media reform bill was introduced. Despite continued resistance, the ruling party is pressing ahead, signaling more legislative standoffs in the weeks to come. Moon Hae-yeon, Arirang News.
The president's office says it'll seek to advance ties with Beijing based on its firm alliance with Washington. The statement shared earlier on this Tuesday follows a comment by Foreign Minister Jo Hyun in an interview with the Washington Post, during which he referred to China becoming, quote, somewhat problematic with its neighbors. The top office claims Jo's remarks sought to reaffirm a commitment to constructive ties with Beijing for regional peace and prosperity despite the differences. South Korea's Prime Minister Kim Min-seok has called last week's tariff deal with the U.S. a meaningful outcome, despite some challenging conditions. Presiding over a cabinet meeting on Tuesday in place of President Lee Jae-myung, who is currently on vacation, Kim thanked ministers for securing what he described as a key interest for the country's agriculture and livestock industries. This appears to echo the Korean government's stance that it did not concede to further opening its rice and beef markets to U.S. imports. The Prime Minister also called on relevant ministries to swiftly implement emergency response measures in areas at risk of heavy rainfall. A new task force made up of top government officials and corporate leaders launched its first meeting today to chart a strategic map to tangible economic growth. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has more.
Deputy Prime Minister for Economy and Finance Koo Yoon-chol says businesses are at the core of the Lee Jae-myung administration's growth vision, which seeks, quote, real growth. He was speaking Tuesday as the new Growth Strategy Task Force held its first meeting with Koo leading, joined by top officials and business leaders, including SK Group Chairman Choi Tae-won, who also heads the Korea Chamber of Commerce.
We now need to focus on more fundamental economic growth. I believe the next 5 years are Korea's last real opportunity to transition into a super innovative economy.
One key agenda item was easing legal risks for companies. The government plans to reduce criminal liability for CEOs, including in breach of trust cases, and shift towards fines and civil compensation. Minor violations without intent or gross negligence could be exempt from criminal charges altogether. But penalties for serious offenses such as unfair trading or safety violations will be strengthened. The task force also reviewed the outcome of the recent Korea-US tariff deal. Industry Minister Kim Jong-kwan said the agreement eased uncertainty for exporters, especially in autos, semiconductors, and pharmaceuticals, and helped preserve Korea's competitiveness in the U.S. market, which accounts for nearly 20% of Korean exports. Even if new tariffs are introduced, Korea will retain most favored nation treatment, ensuring it's not disadvantaged compared to Japan or the EU. Officials also again confirmed no new concessions were made on beef or rice, though future talks could address quarantine procedures such as for U.S. apples. Chairman Choi Tae-won welcomed the deal but urged the government to follow through on the details and ensure both sides maximize investment synergy. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Inflation here in South Korea last month rose above 2% for the second month in a row on higher costs for processed food and seafood. Our correspondent Moon Ji-young has this report.
Korea's consumer prices saw an increase in the 2% range in July for the second straight month. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday showed that the country's consumer price index, a key gauge of inflation, rose 2.1% in July year-on-year. Inflation had remained above the Bank of Korea's 2% target for 4 consecutive months through April, subsequently seeing a dip in May before edging up again in June.
While the rise in agricultural, livestock, and fishery product prices expanded due to heat waves and heavy rain, the slowdown in the pace of increases for personal services, excluding dining out, alongside a shift to a decline in petroleum prices, led to a 0.1 percentage point decrease from the previous month.
Prices of processed food products jumped over 4% due to factory price increases, adding 0.35 percentage points to July's overall inflation. Agricultural product prices edged down 0.1%, however, with a notable soaring of watermelon prices by over 20%. The agency noted that extreme heat and heavy rainfall resulted in unfavorable supply conditions, while demand rose sharply. Prices of seafood products rose over 7%, while mackerel prices climbed more than 12%. The agency points to a decline in catches caused by rising sea temperatures. Prices of livestock grew 3.5%, including a significant increase in domestic beef, which is highly sought after thanks to livelihood recovery consumption coupons distributed by the government. In contrast, oil prices fell 1%, reversing an increase in the previous month amid falling international crude prices. During a review of price trends on the same day, the Bank of Korea noted that prices of farm produce are expected to rise rapidly due to unfavorable weather conditions. It plans to closely monitor the inflation path in response to high uncertainties surrounding external conditions. The central bank also added that a significant slowdown in price growth could occur this month, affected by planned bill discounts and other services by major mobile carriers. Moon Ji-young, Arirang News.
South Korea is facing a summer of extremes, with the scorching heat waves followed by intense downpours. Now, experts say there is a reason behind this. Our Park Hyo-bin has the details.
This July was one of the hottest months on record in South Korea, but it was also one of the most devastating in terms of rainfall. According to a Korea Meteorological Administration report on Tuesday, the country's average temperature last month was 27.1 degrees Celsius, the second highest since precise records began in 1973. There were 14.5 days categorized as heat wave days with temperatures exceeding 33 degrees, the third highest on record. The extreme heat triggered a surge in heat-related illnesses. The emergency authorities responded to over 2,400 emergency calls related to heat stroke and other conditions in July, up more than 140% from the same time last year. Heavy rain has also battered parts of the country. Mid-July saw rainfall double the seasonal average, with over 240 millimeters falling nationwide, the fourth heaviest on record for that period. This extreme mix of heat and rain forced the government to activate both its heatwave and heavy rain Central Disaster and Safety Countermeasure Headquarters for the second year in a row. Since the task force was established in 2019, this is only the second time both systems have run simultaneously. Experts say there's a reason behind these extreme weather patterns.
This summer, a strong North Pacific high brought in hot, humid air, while another high from Tibet expanded overhead, trapping heat over the Korean peninsula. At the same time, cold air from the north clashed with this heat, creating intense rain clouds and heavy downpours lately.
The impact is already being felt. Last Sunday, over 140 millimeters of rain fell in an hour in Muan-gun County, Jeollanam-do Province, leaving one person dead and causing widespread flooding. And on Tuesday, most of the country still remains under heat advisories or warnings. Experts recommend staying hydrated and limiting outdoor activity during peak daytime heat.
To stay safe during heat waves, drink plenty of water regularly and avoid going outside during the hottest hours. It's better to go out in the early morning or evening.
With up to 120 millimeters of rain forecast for central regions on Wednesday, authorities are urging residents to stay alert and take precautions. Park Hyo-bin, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung has pledged efforts to support the journey to healing from the atomic bombings on the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki 80 years ago on this month. Taking to Facebook on this Tuesday, he also conveyed his deepest condolences to the victims and their families. Tens of thousands of Koreans were among those killed or left with lasting health consequences. He also made reference to South Korea's Special Act on the Support for Korean Atomic Bomb Victims enacted in 2017, calling it a practical foundation for assistance, but acknowledged that more needs to be done. The body of a North Korean man found on the shore of Incheon City's Seongmo-do Island in late June will be cremated here in South Korea. This is according to Seoul's Unification Ministry and follows North Korea's failure to respond to South Korea's earlier proposal for the body transfer via the truce village of Panmunjom at 3 p.m. today on Tuesday. Pyongyang has remained silent. U.S. President Donald Trump is ramping up pressure on India over its oil trade with Russia. As Washington pushes for a ceasefire in Ukraine, tariff threats are emerging as a part of a broader strategy to tighten the screws on Moscow. Our Pyongyang Young has more.
U.S. President Donald Trump is turning up the pressure on India just days before a 25% reciprocal tariff is set to take effect on August 7th, and the U.S. set ceasefire deadline between Russia and Ukraine of August 8th. In a post on social media, Trump accused India of making huge profits from buying and reselling Russian oil, while turning a blind eye to how many people are dying in Ukraine, saying he would be substantially raising the tariffs paid by India to the U.S. The move is widely viewed as part of a dual strategy, pressuring India while indirectly targeting Russia by going after one of its key oil customers.
So what he said very clearly is that it is not acceptable for India to continue financing this war by purchasing the oil from Russia.
In an official statement, Indian spokesperson Randir Jaiswal said the targeting of India was unfair and unreasonable, explaining that India had turned to Russian oil only after traditional suppliers redirected shipments to Europe following the Ukraine conflict. He also pointed out that the U.S. still imports chemicals and minerals from Russia for its nuclear and EV industries, and that India will take all necessary steps to safeguard its national interest and economic security. Russia, for its part, dismissed the moves. In a statement, Foreign Ministry spokesperson Maria Zakharova said no tariff wars or sanctions can halt the natural course of history, adding that Russia will deepen ties with the global south and resist the unlawful unilateral sanctions. Meanwhile, U.S. Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff is scheduled to visit Moscow on August 6th, possibly to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin, a move seen as an attempt to push for progress on a ceasefire. Pyongyang, Arirang News.
And Russia says it will no longer follow a missile ban agreed with the U.S. during the Soviet era. And meanwhile, NATO has announced new weapons support for Ukraine. Our Choi Soo-hyung reports.
Russia says it will no longer be bound by a treaty on the deployment of intermediate-range missiles. On Monday local time, the Russian Foreign Ministry claimed the U.S. has been deploying intermediate-range missiles in Europe and Asia. Moscow said the move is a response to new threats. The INF Treaty, signed in 1987 between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, banned the production, testing and deployment of ground-launched ballistic and cruise missiles with ranges of 500 to 5,500 kilometers. In 2019, during U.S. President Donald Trump's first term, Washington pulled out of the agreement, arguing Moscow had long been violating the treaty. Russia denied accusations of violations, continuing to hold back on developing missiles banned under the treaty. Moscow's statement on Monday followed President Trump's order, issued 3 days before, to reposition 2 U.S. nuclear submarines in response to the deputy head of Russia's Powerful Security Council, Dmitry Medvedev's remarks about the risk of war between Washington and Moscow. Medvedev also warned an ex to expect further steps tying the Foreign Ministry's announcement to what he called NATO countries' anti-Russia policy. NATO is stepping up its support for Ukraine, starting with the Netherlands. The alliance plans to purchase U.S.-made weapon systems. Valued at around $579 million, the aid package will include missiles for the Patriot air defense system.
The Dutch are just the first of many. You're going to see a series of announcements in the coming weeks. You know, when we announced this facility that allowed our NATO allies to buy U.S. equipment and provide that to Ukraine for their defense, we had a lot of our allies raise their hand and line up.
Ukraine has also continued its offensive, striking 5 Russian fighter jets in Russian-occupied Crimea. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky claimed Ukrainian forces are also facing mercenaries from China, Pakistan and Africa. Choi Soo-hyung, Arirang News.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is demanding at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into Gaza as a precondition for returning to negotiations with Israel. But Israeli Prime Minister says he will convene his security cabinet this week to discuss how to instruct the military to proceed in the enclave to meet all of his war goals. Lee Seung-ja has more.
Palestinian militant group Hamas is open to restarting peace talks with Israel. However, the precondition to returning to negotiations is the entry of at least 250 humanitarian aid trucks per day into the Gaza Strip. According to Al Jazeera, Gaza officials report that over 22,000 aid trucks are currently waiting outside the enclave, while an average of just 84 trucks have been allowed in daily since Israel eased restrictions on July 27th. Humanitarian organizations have warned that at least 600 trucks per day are required to meet basic needs. Gaza's health ministry said Monday that 6 more people, including a child, had died from starvation in the previous 24 hours, bringing the total number of starvation-related deaths since the start of the conflict to 181, including 94 children. However, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Monday that he would convene his security cabinet this week in order to discuss how his military will proceed in Gaza and meet all his war goals.
We must continue to stand together and fight together to achieve all our war objectives: the defeat of the enemy, the release of our hostages, and the assurance that Gaza will no longer pose a threat to Israel. Later this week, I will convene the cabinet to instruct the IDF on how to achieve these three objectives, all of them without exception.
Meanwhile, according to a report by Axios on Monday, more than a dozen House Democrats have signed a letter calling on the Trump administration to formally recognize a Palestinian state. The latest push signals a renewed effort among some U.S. lawmakers to support Palestinian statehood, with at least one Democrat planning to introduce a pro-statehood resolution in Congress. 이승재, Arirang News.
It was hot today with heatwave warnings across the country. The daytime temperature rose to 33 degrees Celsius in Seoul and 35 degrees in Daegu. Tomorrow it will rise up to 28 degrees in Seoul with rain during the day. Heavy rain is expected tomorrow, especially the central regions. More than 120 millimeters of rain is expected in Gyeonggi-do and Gangwon-do provinces, more than 100 millimeters in the Chungcheong-do provinces, and 30 to 80 millimeters in the Seoul metropolitan area. Please take extra precautions. Morning will start warm tomorrow at 27 degrees in Seoul and Busan, 24 degrees in Chuncheon. Daily highs will go up to 28 degrees in Seoul and Chuncheon, 34 degrees in Gyeongju. This rain will mostly stop on Thursday morning and tropical nights will cool down from Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. For all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
어렸을 때 아버지가 클래식을 좋아하셔서 자연스럽게 공연장을 이제 가족들이 다 같이 가게 되었는데 그때 포피아노 연주를 제가 실제로 가서 봤었는데 그때 이제 너무 멋있다 생각이 들어서 부모님께 피아노를 하고 싶다고 졸랐습니다. 저조차도 누군가의 연주를 보고 이렇게 피아니스트를 꿈꿔왔듯이 누군가도 제 연주를 듣고 다양한 감정을 이렇게 느꼈으면 좋겠어요. 어쨌든 저는 21세기 사람이니까 21세기 트렌드를 또 잃으면 안 될 것 같아서 간혹은 또 가요나 팝송도 많이 들으려고 노력하고 있고요. 그러다가도 또 이제 다시 클래식으로 돌아오게 되더라고요. 그냥 클래식 음악은 진짜 어떤 시대에 들어도 누구나 공감할 수 있다고 생각을 해서 그래서 클래식 음악이 제일 마음에 와닿는 것 같아요. 지나바카오 콩쿠르에서 특히 2라운드 연주가 저는 항상 기억에 남는 게 너무 무서웠어요, 사실. 한 음만 치는데 다음 음이 뭐였는지 기억이 안 날까 봐 너무 두렵더라고요. 악몽을 너무 많이 꿨었고 연습을 하는데도 불구하고 끝까지 안 되는 음악적인 패시지라든지 테크닉적인 패시지들이 있는데 그게 무대 위에서 정말 무의식적인 세계에서 갑자기 해결이 되는 경우가 있더라고요. 그랬을 때 이제 희열을 확 느끼는 것 같아요. 제가 지금 공부하고 있는 곡들, 즐겨 연주하고 있는 곡들이 사실 클래식 음악을 처음 접하는 분들에겐 익숙하지 않은 곡들이지만 지금 제 나이에 가장 잘 표현할 수 있는 음악이라고 생각을 해서 그런 레퍼토리를 준비를 하고 있는 거니까 같이 즐겨주시고 같이 공유해 주시면 감사하겠습니다.
held its first debate over the weekend.
The economy is expected to expand 2.5% this year.
Boosting Korea's ties with its global partners on the sidelines of the Status UN summit.
A massive drone attack on Ukraine overnight on Monday and Tuesday.
Arirang. 도시는 세계와 연결되어 문화를 창조했고 새로운 것을 받아들였다.
함께여서 우리는 더 자유롭고 더 멀리 갈 수 있어.
닫힌 문이 아니라 열린 질문으로.
나에게 에이펙은
자유,
융합,
국제성,
다양성, 포용,
개발.
신라의 정신이 에이펙 2025로 이어집니다.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyun. South Korea has begun dismantling its border loudspeakers aimed at North Korea just 54 days after halting the propaganda broadcast that once echoed across the DMZ. Now, these devices used for psychological operations and sharp criticism of the North Korean regime are being removed, and it's a clear symbolic gesture from Seoul, part of a broader pattern of de-escalation efforts, even as Pyongyang remains unresponsive. Now, meanwhile, Washington and Seoul are reportedly delaying segments of their joint military drills officially due to the heat, but the timing does raise questions on whether these moves are part of a quietly coordinated effort to reopen diplomatic space with the North or a one-sided concession. For a closer look into the situation, we connect to Park Won-gun, professor of North Korea Studies at Ewha Women's University. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you for having me.
So, Professor Park, like I've said, South Korea began dismantling its border loudspeakers yesterday, and Seoul's defense ministry framed this as a practical move to de-escalate tensions. Do you think this kind of preemptive action could help open the door to restoring mutual trust between the two Koreas?
Well, under the Lee Jae-myung government, South Korea took several preemptive steps to reduce the tensions and improve relations with the North. They controlled the leaflet drops and stopped and removed the loudspeakers you just mentioned, and fully approved the civilian contacts with the North, and even considering the return of long-term unconverted prisoners. Especially stopping the loudspeaker showed the Lee government's commitment to not sending information into North Korea. The thing North Korea reacts to most strongly. Probably many of you still remember that back in the year 2015, so-called bounding mine incident. At the time, we have a couple of casualties by the North Korean's mine. So that at the time, then the President Park Geun-hye decided to resume the loudspeaker. And finally, at the final moment, North Korea is back down, and they apologized the bounding mine incident. That was for the first time since the Korean War, North Korea has apologized to South Korean government and South Korean people. So it means that North Korea has such a sensitivity of the entering information to the North. So taking down the loudspeakers was like a symbol of an irreversible step by the Lee Jae-myung government. However, throughout this whole process, North Korea didn't reach out or respond directly to the South Korean government. They also stopped their broadcast and even stopped sending trash balloons. We have many trash balloons last year, but they didn't try to communicate with South Korea. One of the other examples is that the 6 North Korean people who fled to South Korea finally back to the North Korea the last month, and 2 of them were in South Korea in March this year. And then since March, South Korean government, both Yoon Suk-yeol government and Lee Jae-myung government tried to reach North Korean government in order to send back the North Korean people, but they haven't responded at all. So this is one of the examples that North Korea has totally blocked any kind of a communication with South Korea. In December 2023, at their 8th Central Committee of 9th Plenary Session, North Korea officially declared that it now sees South Korea as hostile, separate country. They called this is a major policy decision and a fundamental shift their direction. So no matter how much power is concentrated in one person there, the North Korea, without this major line change or major policy change from the North, it's very unlikely North Korea will have any kind of a contact with South Korea so far.
Right. So we are having these gestures, and like you said, North Korea also stopped sending trash balloons. But despite these kinds of gestures, it seems as though Pyongyang seems kind of indifferent and kind of silent regarding this situation. So, Professor Park, at this point, we wonder, for this current strategy of the Lee Jae-myung administration to work, what do you think more could be done? Or do you think real progress could depend on a policy shift within the North Korea itself?
Yes, I already mentioned that is unfortunately depend on the North Korean's policy shift because North Korea recently made its stance on the South Korea crystal clear through the statement by Kim Yo-jong. Of course, she is the Kim Jong's sister. And that was the July 28th that Kim Yo-jong issued the statement toward South Korea, and 29th, and another statement to United States. And as many of you know, that Kim Yo-jong usually speaks on behalf of her brother, of course, Kim Jong-un, especially when it comes to messages aimed at South Korea or United States. Just looking at the title of this statement tells us a lot about the North Korea's current thinking. The title was North-South relations have completely moved beyond the idea of being the same people. They have finally decided to consider South Korea is not the one nation or one people. And it's really a big shift. North Korea didn't refer to South Korea as South Joseon as they used. They called them as North Joseon and they called South Korea as South Joseon. Instead, they used the full name Republic of Korea, 대한민국, which shows they now treat the South as a completely separate state. They even use a new term, DPRK-RK relations, not inter-Korean relations. So, and then they went a step further. North Korea described itself as the Kim Il-sung nation, while calling the South Korea Republic of Korea tribe. So totally different the meaning. That's a clear rejection of the idea that we are one people or brothers. Even North Korea officially proclaimed that they are simply giving up the reunification effort at all. So based on that, North Korea now says it will not engage with South Korea, no matter which political party is in power, liberal or conservative. In her Kim Yo-jong's statement, she said that whether they claim to be democratic or they wear the mask of the conservatives, South Korea will never be a partner for reconciliation or cooperation. This echoes what Kim Jong-un said back in December 2023 at the 8th Central Committee's 9th plenary meeting. He said exactly the same thing. He said that South Korea's aim to collapse the North system is the same, no matter if they say they are the democratic or conservative. So Kim Yo-jong also made clear that we, North Korea, have no interest in what policies come out of Seoul or what proposal they make. We will not sit down with them and then we have nothing to discuss. It's a very strong message to total rejection to any kind of a meaningful relationship with South Korea. So unless North Korea walks back or adjusts this two hostile state approach, we don't see any realistic way to break the current stalemate in inter-Korean relations. And just to make their point even clearer, North Korea followed the very next day, on July 29th, with a statement toward the United States. In that one, they completely exclude South Korea from the picture, but left a small door open for the talks with Washington, though with some conditions.
Right. So we will really have to see what could bring Pyongyang back to the table when negotiating with the Trump administration as well. Now, in the meantime, so speaking of America, both sides are quietly coordinating an August summit following a recent trade deal, South Korea and the U.S. And notably, defense cost sharing was left out of the agreement. Do you expect this to take center stage when the two presidents meet? And if it does, what do you think South Korea, in what way do you think South Korea should respond to that?
Well, so there are several agendas still. We have to, South Korea and United States have to talk about the tariff is one of them too. We haven't cleared out some of the important items of the tariff. And especially South Korea hasn't mentioned about how much money we are going to spend to buy American goods because European Union and Japan and they promised to buy these tremendous amount of U.S. goods. So that part and very high possibility talk between United States and South Korea. But at the same time, as you just mentioned, there are a good chance that President Trump may bring up the issue of South Korea's paying more for defense during the upcoming summit. Even during the summit preparation, we already got into this preparation process. Washington probably and very high, strong possibility that raised both Seoul's position on countering China and the cost-sharing issue as key agenda items. Now here is the problem. The South Korea already signed the 12th Special Measure Agreement, also known as SMA, under the Biden administration, and is set to take effect starting next year. That agreement has already been approved by South Korea's National Assembly. So from our Seoul's point of view, the position is clear. We can't and we will not renegotiate of this SMA. But as we saw in tariff talks, Trump does not respect the previous agreement. He even ignored the ROK-US FTA, free trade agreement. So we cannot rule out the possibility that he might also try to override the existing SMA. What could be even more challenging for South Korea is if Trump demanded that we pay for the joint military exercise and the deployment of the U.S. strategic asset. Those costs are not part of SMA. Just to clarify, the SMA only covers three things: salary of the Korean workers on U.S. bases, logistics support, and military construction. That's it. So joint drills and strategic asset deployment, those come with a massive price tag. And if Trump insists that South Korea foot the bill, that would put us in a very tough position. In fact, he made a similar demand during his first term. He might even go so far as to scale back or cancel the exercise or asset deployment if South Korea doesn't pay up. That would weaken our readiness against North Korean threat. I personally clearly remember that back in 2018 after Singapore summit, when Trump has a press briefing, he suddenly mentioned about the scale back and halt of joint military exercise. At the time, nobody knows his statement before. Even the Jim Mattis, the defense secretary of the United States, he had no idea at all. So these kind of things can happen. So here is my opinion. This is my suggestion. I think South Korea should renegotiate the 12th SMA and offer to pay an additional 1.5 trillion won, double the current amount. Of course, it's a huge amount of money, but that way South Korea could be covering 100% of the cost of stationing U.S. troops in Korea. In return, the U.S. should continue to cover the cost of strategic asset deployment and joint military exercise, just like it used to. Also, we could use this for the tariff negotiation, using the increased defense spending as leverage to lower the cost of buying the U.S. goods.
So we suggest a doubled amount of the current and ask for the current situation to be maintained in the meantime, right?
Right.
So thank you for your opinion on that. Now, Professor Park, let's also touch upon the North Korea front. North Korea has floated the idea of a dialogue with Washington themselves, but only if it says its status as a nuclear weapon state is acknowledged. Do you expect the upcoming summit to address prospects for a U.S.-North Korea talks or denuclearization as well?
Well, if we look at the Kim Yo-jong's statement from the 29th, the last month, North Korea seems to be leaving the door open for the possible summit with the United States. I just mentioned that, but only under the certain condition. North Korea is demanding that ROK-US joint military drills and strategic asset deployment stop. And instead of talking about denuclearization, they are now pushing for the nuclear arms reduction talks. The White House has responded by saying that President Trump remains open to communicating with the Chairman Kim as long as it's aimed at ending North Korea's nuclear program completely. That's a very clear message. The United States is not interested in talks based on the North Korea's terms or agenda. Definitely, the United States wanted to talk about the denuclearization. So now what really matters going forward is the language used in the joint statement after ROK-US summit. I think that United States will wanted to include the phase complete denuclearization of North Korea, but South Korean government might try to leave it out or water it down a bit. We know that Lee Jae-myung's government definitely wanted to have resumed any kind of relationship with North Korea, so they do not provoke North Korea at all by saying denuclearization, because denuclearization is a very sensitive word for the North Korea. But since after inauguration of Trump and the United States government in their official document, they keep mentioning about denuclearization of North Korea, including the last February the summit between United States and Japan, and that month or so we have a trilateral summit among the trilateral foreign secretary summit among South Korea, Japan, and United States, and also Quad and summit. More of them are talking about denuclearization of North Korea. So what's important to remember is that neither Seoul or North Washington has laid out an official North Korean policy yet. So from now on, I think two sides, South Korea and United States, really need to coordinate closely and come up with a unified message when it comes to dealing with Pyongyang. And in my view, that message must include a clear commitment to North Korea's complete denuclearization. At the same time, it should also express a willingness to engage in dialogue. Unfortunately, for South Korean government, doesn't matter whether it's a liberal or conservative government governments always emphasize the deterrence of the North Korea, and also deterrence of the North Korea's nuclear threat. In different front, the liberals, progressive, always talk about engagement. So my suggestion is that we have to have both deterrence and engagement in the same phase. So that's the only way or the effective way to dealing with North Korea.
So the words that will come out of the ROK U.S. summit will be very, very crucial in determining the direction moving forward. Now, let's also talk about the deepening Russia-North Korea partnership, which is very concerning. In latest data by Ukrainian intelligence, it says up to 30,000 North Korean troops are now inside a Russian territory. Professor, from your view, how realistic is the possibility of further deployments to Russia?
I think there is news. You just mentioned the Ukraine intelligence saying that North Korea might send over 30,000 more troops to Russia in the coming months. And they even said that there would be a possibility to have joint military drills with Russia and Belarus and the North Korea during the so-called gov't 2025 exercise. The report specifically raised concern that this large portion of this additional North Korean force could be involved in those exercises. But in my view, the number 30,000 figures sounds pretty exaggerated. I don't think North Korea will send actual combat troops. In fact, last month on July 17th, Sergei Shoigu, the Secretary of Russia's Security Council, visited Pyongyang and said North Korea had agreed to send around 6,000 personnel, mainly engineers and military construction units, not the frontline soldiers. What really matters here is that North Korea and Russia are laying the groundwork for long-term cooperation, even after war ends. If North Korea is sending engineers and workers for post-war reconstructions and not combat troops, then I believe that this kind of cooperation between the two countries is likely to continue for a while. But still, I think that is some limitation between Russia and North Korea's cooperation because, first of all, historically, those two countries would not trust each other. Even preparation of the Korean War back in 1950s, they were not trusting with each other. And second, still, I think the Russians' invasion to Ukraine is a very specific incident to bringing these two countries together. In other words, if the Russia and Ukraine war ended, then those cooperation as we are seeing right now, I don't think it can maintain in that level. And finally, the Russia and United States relations are also very important. If Trump is successfully normalized relations with Russia, then Russia have a little bit difficult, have some difficulty to maintain this kind of cooperation with North Korea.
So it seems all signs point to a rapidly shifting diplomatic landscape around North Korea, and we will be able to make sure that we'll keep close tabs on the upcoming developments as well. But as for now, we'll have to conclude our discussion at this point. Thank you so much for your time and for your insights tonight, Professor Park. We really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.